Hello, my name is Scarlett, and I want to tell you about my journey, how I learned to think in English correctly. When I first started learning English, I didn't just want to memorize words. I wanted my brain to live in English. I discovered that when you can think in English, speaking becomes natural, listening becomes easy, and you stop translating in your head. When I think back to the time when I first started trying to think in English, I remember sitting alone in my small apartment in New York on a cold winter morning. The heating system was humming in the background, the kind of steady sound that makes you feel both cozy and a little lazy. I had a warm mug of coffee in my hands, and outside my window I could see the gray sky over the city. The sidewalks were wet from last night's snow, and a few people were walking quickly, bundled up in scarves and gloves. I was inside, safe from the cold, but in my mind, I was restless. I had been living in the United States for a while, but I still felt like English was something I had to pull out of my head instead of something that flowed naturally. Whenever I needed to speak, I would first think in my native language, then quickly translate it in my mind, and only then say it out loud in English. That process was slow and exhausting. Sometimes I would lose my turn in a conversation because by the time I had my sentence ready, the topic had already changed. It frustrated me so much. I wanted to be able to think and speak in English like the people around me. That morning, as I sipped my coffee, I decided to try something simple, something I could do without a textbook, without a teacher, without even leaving my apartment. I decided to think in English using the easiest sentences I could make. I didn't care if they were short or basic. I just wanted to train my brain to grab English words without going through my first language. So I looked around my living room and started naming what I saw. This is a couch. My eyes moved to the window. The window is open. I noticed a plant in the corner. The plant is green. I was saying these sentences in my head, not out loud. It felt strange at first, like I was talking to an invisible friend. But I kept going. The coffee is hot. The rug is soft. The book is on the table. At that moment, I realized something powerful. I didn't need big, complicated sentences to start thinking in English. I just needed to start. My sentences were as simple as a child's, but my brain was finally beginning to use English without translation. I felt like I had found a tiny key to a very big door. That day, I kept practicing. When I went into the kitchen, I thought, the fridge is cold. The spoon is dirty. The water is boiling. While doing laundry, I said in my head, the shirt is wet. The dryer is loud. The basket is full. At first, I had to really focus, because my mind wanted to drift back into my first language, but I kept pulling it back to English, sentence by sentence. I started to notice that my surroundings became my English classroom. The city itself was helping me learn, not by giving me grammar rules, but by giving me objects, actions, and situations I could describe in real time. Walking down the street, I'd think, the light is red. The bus is coming. The man is talking on the phone. It became a little game. How many things could I describe before I reached the next block? The more I did it, the faster my brain worked. Instead of pausing to translate, I would see something, and the English words would appear almost instantly. It was like clearing a path in a forest. At first, I had to fight my way through the bushes, but with each step, the path got wider and smoother. Some days it was easier than others. There were mornings when I woke up and my mind felt heavy, like it didn't want to do any work at all. On those days, I kept my sentences even smaller. I am tired. The bed is warm. The sun is bright. And you know what? Even on lazy days, those tiny sentences kept me moving forward. After a few weeks, something interesting started to happen. I found myself making sentences without even meaning to. I would pour cereal into a bowl and think, "The milk is cold." I would hear the subway in the distance and think, "The train is late." I wasn't forcing myself anymore. My brain had started to do it automatically. That was when I knew I was making real progress. But the biggest change came when I began to add small details to my sentences. Instead of saying, "The coffee is hot," I would think, "The coffee is hot and smells sweet." Instead of, "The street is empty," I would think, "The street is empty because it's early Sunday morning." I was still keeping my grammar simple, but I was giving my brain more to work with. It was like moving from black and white TV to color. Everything felt richer. Thinking in English in this simple way also gave me more confidence when speaking. When a neighbor asked me, "How's your morning?" I didn't freeze. I had already been practicing short sentences in my head all morning so I could say, "It's good. I'm just making coffee and relaxing." It wasn't poetry, but it felt natural. The best part? I didn't need extra time in my schedule to do this. I didn't need to sit at a desk or open a textbook. I could practice while brushing my teeth, riding the subway, waiting in line at the grocery store, or even walking my dog in the park. Every ordinary moment became a chance to train my brain. I remember one day, I was walking to the store to buy milk, and it was snowing lightly. I thought, "The snow is soft." Then I noticed the way it was sticking to my coat. "The snow is sticking to my coat." Then I saw kids playing on the sidewalk. "The kids are throwing snowballs." Without even realizing it, I had made 3 sentences in under 10 seconds. That's when I smiled to myself. I was starting to live in English. Of course, there were moments when I made mistakes. Sometimes I couldn't remember the exact word I needed, so I used a simpler one instead. If I couldn't think of sidewalk, I'd say the walking path in my head. If I forgot countertop, I'd say kitchen table. This taught me another important skill. Don't stop your thinking just because you can't remember a word. Find another way to say it. That's exactly what native speakers do. This habit of making small sentences in my head didn't just change my English, it changed the way I saw the world. I started paying attention to details I had never noticed before. I didn't just walk through life on autopilot. I looked at things closely so I could describe them. And in a way, that made my days feel richer and more alive. By the end of the first month, thinking in English felt less like an exercise and more like a reflex. My sentences were getting longer, but they were still clear and simple. I wasn't worrying about grammar rules or perfect word choice. I was focusing on keeping my brain in English mode. And that's when I was ready to take the next step, making my thoughts more interactive. Because while describing things was a great start, I knew that real thinking in English meant more than just making statements. It meant having conversations in my head, asking myself questions, and answering them, like a mental dialogue. And the funny thing is, the very next day, the opportunity to try that came without me even planning it. The day after I realized how natural my short English sentences were becoming, I woke up to another chilly New York morning. The sun was peeking through my blinds, casting thin golden lines across the floor. I stretched under the blanket, still warm from sleep, and my mind immediately began doing what it had learned over the past month, making small sentences. The bed is warm. The air is cold. The window is open. But as I lay there, I felt a new kind of restlessness. I didn't just want to describe my world anymore. I wanted to interact with it in my mind. It happened without much planning. I was still in bed when I glanced at the clock and thought, "What time is it?" My mind, without hesitation, answered, "It's 7:30. That might seem tiny, almost meaningless, but it was different from what I'd been doing before. Instead of only making statements, I had just asked myself a question in English and answered it in English. That small change made my brain feel like it had just switched into a higher gear. The idea stuck with me all morning. As I got up to make breakfast, I kept doing it. I opened the fridge and thought, "What do I want to eat?" Then I answered, "I want eggs." As I poured water into the coffee maker, I asked, "Do I have enough coffee left?" I answered, "Yes, I do." The questions were simple, but they made me feel like I was having a real conversation, just with myself. That's when I realized why this was so important. When you think only in statements, your brain is doing half the work. But when you ask and answer questions, you're creating a back-and-forth flow, the same way real conversations work. It's no longer about repeating what you see. It's about making decisions, expressing wants, giving opinions, and responding to ideas, all in English. This was exactly the kind of mental workout I needed. I decided to make it a habit. That day, while walking to the corner store, I played a little mental game. I looked at the sky and asked, "Is it going to rain?" I answered, "Maybe later. The clouds look heavy." I passed a coffee shop and asked, "Do I want another coffee?" My mind quickly replied, "No, I've already had one." By the time I reached the store, I had asked myself at least 10 questions without even noticing. The effort. The funny thing is, this felt more engaging than just making sentences. I wasn't only labeling my surroundings, I was thinking about them, reacting to them, making choices. And that's when I understood, thinking in English isn't just about knowing the words. It's about living in those words, making them part of your daily decisions. At first, the questions were short and obvious. What is this? Where am I going? Do I need this? But as I practiced, they got more complex. Why am I feeling tired? What would happen if I took a different route home? How much time do I have before my appointment? I didn't always answer perfectly, but I always answered in English, even if the sentence was simple. I remember one afternoon sitting in Central Park with a coffee in my hand, watching people walk by. I started playing another mental game, asking myself questions about strangers. Where is that man going? Maybe he's going to work. Why is that little girl laughing? She's playing with her dog. This not only helped me think faster, but also made me curious about the world around me. It turned my practice into something creative and fun. Of course, there were moments when my mind tried to slip back into my first language. Sometimes I caught myself asking a question in my native language, and I would stop, repeat it in English, and then answer in English. It took discipline, but every time I corrected myself, I felt a small victory. This habit even started to help me in real conversations. One evening, a friend called and asked if I wanted to meet for dinner. Normally, I would freeze for a moment before answering, translating my thoughts into English. But this time, my brain already had the conversation ready. In my head, I heard myself ask, "Do I want to go out tonight?" And then answer, "Yes, I do." So when I opened my mouth, the words came out naturally. "Yes, I'd love to. Where should we meet?" It was like my brain was rehearsing all the time. The questions I asked myself during the day prepared me for the questions other people would ask me in real life, and that's when I realized this wasn't just a thinking exercise. This was real conversation training. I also noticed that asking questions in English made me think about vocabulary in a different way. When I asked myself, "What do I need from the store?" I had to recall words for groceries. When I asked, "How will I get there?" I had to think about transportation words. Each question pulled new vocabulary from my memory, strengthening it. Sometimes I even challenged myself with hypothetical questions. What would I do if it started raining right now? What would I cook if I had guests tonight? What would I say if someone asked me for directions? These what-if questions prepared me for situations I might not face every day but could still happen. They also forced me to use different verb tenses and sentence structures without feeling like I was doing a grammar exercise. One of my favorite memories from this stage was when I got caught in a little snowstorm. I was walking home from the subway when snow started falling, heavily. I could barely see, and the wind was biting at my face. I pulled my scarf up and asked myself, should I take a shortcut? My mind answered, yes, it will be faster. Then, halfway through the shortcut, I thought, was this a good idea? And answered, no, the sidewalk is icy. I laughed, to myself, because it felt like I was starring in my own little movie where the narrator was speaking in English. I think that's the real beauty of this habit. It makes English feel like the language of your inner voice. Not the language you switch on when you're in class, but the one that lives in your head every moment of the day. And once English becomes the language of your thoughts, it's only a matter of time before it becomes the language of your heart, your humor, your memories, and your dreams. By the time I had been doing this for a few weeks, I didn't even have to remind myself to practice. My brain had learned that English was my default thinking language, especially when asking and answering questions. And then something even more interesting started happening. I began connecting my questions to images in my mind instead of translations. If I asked, "What do I want for dinner?" my brain didn't show me the word in my first language. It showed me a plate of pasta or a slice of pizza. That was when I knew I was moving into the next stage of thinking in English, linking words directly to pictures, feelings, and experiences. That connection between English words and mental images turned out to be one of the most powerful breakthroughs in my journey, and it all started one Saturday morning when I was making breakfast, and my mind worked in a way I had never experienced before. That Saturday morning started like any other. Quiet, calm, and slow. The sun was shining brighter than it had all week, spilling golden light across my kitchen counter. The air felt warmer than usual for a New York winter, and the snow from earlier in the week was melting in little streams along the sidewalks outside. I was in my kitchen, still in my pajamas, making breakfast. The smell of coffee was filling the whole apartment, and the sizzling sound of eggs cooking in the pan felt comforting, almost like a weekend soundtrack. As I cracked another egg into the pan, I asked myself in English, "What am I making?" My brain immediately answered, "I'm making eggs." But then, something unexpected happened. I didn't see the word eggs in my native language in my mind like I used to. I didn't even see the word written in English. Instead, I saw the eggs themselves, bright yellow yolks, bubbling edges, the steam rising from the pan. It was as if my mind had skipped the translation step completely and gone straight to the image. I froze for a moment, not because the eggs were burning, but because I realized something important had just happened. For the first time, I wasn't. connecting an English word to my first language. I was connecting it directly to the object in front of me. My brain had taken a shortcut, not from English to my first language and then to the picture, but from English straight to the picture itself. That was the moment I understood. If I wanted to think in English naturally, I had to train my brain to connect words to images, experiences, and feelings, not to translations. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. That's how children learn their first language. No baby learns the word apple by translating it into another word first. They see an apple, hear the sound apple, and connect the two directly. That's why they can think and speak so naturally. I realized I had to unlearn my old habit of translating and relearn the way a child does, by connecting words to life itself. So I started experimenting right away. As I plated my breakfast, I said to myself, toast, and pictured the warm slice of bread with melted butter. Coffee, and I pictured the dark liquid in my mug, the steam rising up. Fork, and I imagined holding it in my hand, feeling the cold metal against my fingers. I didn't allow myself to think of the word in my native language. If it tried to appear, I pushed it away and focused on the object in front of me. Later that day, I took a walk to the park, determined to turn everything I saw into this direct word-to-picture connection. A dog ran past me and I thought, "Dog!" while picturing its wagging tail and floppy ears. I saw a bench and thought, "Bench," visualizing the wooden slats and the worn metal arms. I passed a couple holding hands and thought, "Couple," while focusing on their smiles and the way they walked in sync. At first, it took real effort to block my first language from sneaking in. Sometimes I would see a tree and the word in. My native language would pop into my head before the English one. When that happened, I would stop and think, no, just the picture. I'd take a second to focus on the tree's shape, the texture of the bark, the sound of its branches moving in the wind, and then I'd say the English word to myself. The more I did this, the faster the English word came first. It also worked with actions, not just objects. When a bird flew overhead, I thought, fly, and pictured the wings moving up and down. When a jogger ran past, I thought, run, and imagined the pounding of shoes on pavement. When I opened my water bottle, I thought, open, and visualized my hand twisting the cap. It was like I was teaching my brain a new dictionary, one made of images instead of translations. This method even worked with feelings. That afternoon, as I sat on a bench enjoying the sunlight, I thought, relaxed. And instead of translating it, I pictured myself leaning back, breathing slowly, feeling warm and content. Later, when a cold breeze hit my face, I thought, cold, and imagined the sensation of the wind brushing against my skin. By connecting English words directly to sensations, I was making them part of my lived experience, not just something I memorized. Something unexpected happened after a few weeks of practicing this way. English started to feel less like a subject. I was learning and more like a lens through which I saw the world. I wasn't just studying vocabulary anymore, I was living it. When I walked into a grocery store, I didn't think of the names of fruits and vegetables in my first language first. I went straight from seeing the shiny red apple to thinking apple in English. No middleman, no delay. This change made me much faster when speaking, too. In conversations, I no longer had to look up a word in my head through translation. I could see the image in my mind and the English word would be right there, ready to use. My sentences flowed more easily, and I didn't get stuck as often. One night I went to dinner with friends, and while we were ordering, the waiter asked me what I wanted to drink. I didn't think of the drink in my first language at all. I saw the image of a cold glass with ice and lemon in my head and immediately said, "I'll have iced tea." That quick, natural response felt so satisfying, it was proof that this method was working. Over time, I made it into a daily challenge. I would choose 5 new words a day, not from a textbook, but from my life, and connect them directly to pictures. One day it might be umbrella, puddle, sneeze, mailbox, and scarf. Another day it might be stir, spill, laugh, glove, and ticket. I would focus on really seeing each thing in my mind. When I said the word, almost like I was building a photo album in my brain labeled only in English. It also helped me avoid a big problem many language learners face, thinking in broken sentences because they're still tied to their first language's grammar. By connecting directly to pictures, I was no longer tempted to use my native language's sentence structure first. English started shaping my thoughts naturally, not through translation filters. One of my favorite moments was when I realized I was even dreaming in this way. I had a dream about being at the beach, and in the dream I saw the ocean and thought ocean in English. I saw the waves and thought waves, heard the seagulls and thought seagulls. It was all in English without me trying. That's when I knew my brain had started to fully adapt. This step, connecting words to pictures, didn't just make my thinking faster. It made English feel real. It made it mine. And once that happened, I was ready for something even more challenging, learning how to take those words and match them to the rhythm and speed of real English conversations. That next stage would come from something I had already been doing a little, but I didn't realize how powerful it could be until I made it a habit, listening carefully to English around me and repeating it silently in my head, as if I were shadowing the speakers, in real time. After I had spent weeks connecting English words to pictures instead of translations, I felt my thinking speed up in ways I had never imagined. My brain no longer needed that slow, awkward bridge from my first language. It could go straight, from experience to English. But as much as I was proud of that progress, I knew there was still a big gap between thinking in English and sounding natural when speaking it. I noticed this one afternoon at a small cafe in downtown Manhattan. I had ordered my usual, black coffee and a blueberry muffin, and sat by the window where I could people watch while sipping from my warm paper cup. At the table next to me, 2 women were having a lively conversation. I couldn't hear every word clearly, but I caught enough to notice something. They spoke quickly, but their words had a rhythm, a natural flow that made the sentences sound smooth. As I listened, I realized my own English still felt choppy in comparison. Sure, I could think in English now, but when I spoke, I often paused too long between words. Or I'd speak with the flat, even tone of someone reading from a script. Native speakers, I noticed, let their voices rise and fall. They blended words together, and they used pauses like a kind of music. That's when it hit me. If I wanted to think in English like a native speaker, I had to make my brain match the rhythm of native speech. And the best way to do that wasn't to speak out loud right away, but to listen and repeat silently in my head. This way, I could practice the melody and speed of English without the pressure of performing. That very afternoon, I started my experiment. I leaned slightly closer to the women's table, pretending to be interested in the street outside, and began repeating their sentences silently to myself. If one of them said, "I can't believe it's already Friday," my brain immediately echoed, I can't believe it's already Friday, matching her exact tone, speed, and pauses. If she laughed and said, "Oh my gosh, that's hilarious," I'd hear myself saying it in my mind the same way, as if my thoughts had become her voice. It felt like shadowing, but instead of using my mouth, I was training my inner voice. I didn't worry about being perfect. I just focused on hearing, then instantly replaying the sounds in my head. Within 10 minutes, I realized how powerful this was. My brain was learning to play back English in real time, without hesitation, without translation. From that day on, I made it a habit. On the subway, I'd eavesdrop on the conversations around me, not to be nosy, but to collect real-life English. A teenager might say, "That movie was so good," and I'd repeat it silently in my head, copying her casual tone. A man talking on the phone might say, "I'll call you back in a few minutes," and I'd echo it mentally, keeping his relaxed pacing. Even TV shows became my training ground. Instead of just watching passively, I'd listen to the actors' lines and instantly repeat them in my mind, word for word. If a character said, "You've got to be kidding me," I'd replay it in my head with the same emphasis and energy. It was like having a private rehearsal in my brain, where I could practice over and over without anyone hearing. What surprised me most was how quickly this started to affect my real speech. One day, I was talking to a friend, and without thinking, I used the exact intonation I had been practicing in my head. She didn't react like anything was unusual, but that was the point. I had sounded natural enough that it didn't stand. Repeating silently also helped me catch things I had never noticed before. Native speakers often drop certain sounds when they talk fast. Going to becomes gonna. What are you becomes whatche. Before I might have struggled to understand these, but now I was hearing them clearly and practicing them in my head. By doing so, I was training myself not only to speak more naturally, but also to understand real spoken English more easily. I took this habit everywhere. At the grocery store, when the cashier said, "Do you want a bag?" I'd silently repeat it with the same light, quick tone. In the park, when a mom called to her kid, "Stay where I can see you," I'd echo it mentally, even matching the urgency in her voice. It was like my brain had become a voice recorder, constantly capturing and replaying snippets of everyday life. At first, I worried that this might just be passive practice, but I quickly realized it was active in the best way. To repeat someone's sentence instantly, I had to focus deeply on every word, every sound, every rise and fall of the voice. That level of attention forced my brain to process English in real time, which is exactly what happens in conversation. Even found myself doing it at the movies. Sitting in a dark theater, I'd listen to the dialogue and silently repeat it in sync with the actors. It felt almost like I was part of the film, speaking alongside them. And because I wasn't actually talking out loud, I could focus completely on speed and rhythm without worrying about making mistakes. Over time, this practice began to blur the line between listening and speaking. My brain was no longer separating them into two different skills. They became one. When I heard English, I could speak it in my head instantly. And when I wanted to speak out loud, the sentences came more smoothly because my mind was already used to forming them in real time. One of the most interesting things I noticed was that my inner English voice started to develop its own personality. Before, when I thought in English, my inner voice sounded stiff, like it was reading a textbook. Now, it was expressive, playful, and alive, just like a real voice in conversation. It wasn't just about the words anymore. It was about the feeling behind them. There was one particular moment that made me realize how much I had changed. I was in line at a coffee shop, and a woman in front of me dropped her phone. She bent down, picked it up, and muttered, "Of course, it falls right when I have my hands full." Without thinking, I repeated it silently in my head. But here's the thing. I also felt the emotion in her voice. I could hear the slight frustration, the humor in her tone, and I matched it perfectly. In my silent repetition, that emotional layer was something I never could have practiced from a textbook. This habit even started to work with music. I'd listen to English songs and repeat certain lines silently, trying to match the singer's rhythm. It didn't matter if it was pop, country, or rock, the exercise was the same. It trained my ear to follow natural stress patterns in words and phrases. By the end of a few months of doing this every day, something incredible happened. When I spoke out loud, my sentences no longer sounded like a slow list of words. They had flow. They had music. I wasn't forcing it. It had become instinct. And perhaps the best part was that this habit didn't require extra time. I could do it on the bus, in the store, at work, at the gym, anywhere people were speaking English. My whole environment had become a free language lab. Still, there was one more step I needed to take to make thinking in English my permanent reality. I had been practicing in my head, shadowing silently, but I wanted English to be more than a habit I turned on and off. I wanted it to be my default way of thinking, no matter where I was or what I was doing. That's when I made a rule for myself. Whenever I was alone, my thoughts had to be in English. It didn't matter if I was cooking, driving, folding laundry, or lying in bed, English had to be the voice in my head, and that final commitment would lead me to the biggest breakthrough of all. There came a point in my journey where I realized that learning English was no longer just about studying, it was about becoming. I didn't want English to feel like a foreign object I had to reach for when I needed it. I wanted it to be part of me, woven into my thoughts, my feelings, and even the quiet moments when no one else could hear me. That's when I decided to make English my default thinking language. It didn't happen overnight. In the beginning, my thoughts would still come in my native language first. I'd hear my inner voice say something, then I'd pause and try to translate it into English before I could respond, even if I was just talking to myself in my head. This constant back and forth slowed me down. It was like walking through a door, realizing you forgot something, turning back to get it, then walking through the door again. That little pause was my brain switching languages, and it was exhausting. One day, I remember standing in the kitchen, making a cup of coffee. I was staring at the steam curling up from the mug, and I thought to myself, this coffee smells amazing, but here's the thing. Without realizing it, I had thought that sentence in English. No translation, no mental detour. Just a clean, direct thought. That was the moment I understood the secret. The more I practiced thinking in English, the more natural it would become. So I started training my brain for it, deliberately. I turned my inner monologue into English. If I was walking down the street and noticed a pretty sunset, I didn't allow myself to think about it in my native language. I would tell myself, look at how the sky is turning orange and gold. If I forgot my grocery list at home, I'd think, okay, don't panic. Let's try to remember. Eggs, milk, bread. The key was to do this for everything. Mundane tasks, emotional moments, even silly daydreams. At first it was clumsy. I'd catch myself halfway through a thought and realize I'd slipped back into my native language. When that happened, I didn't scold myself. I simply restarted the thought in English. It was like lifting a weight at the gym. Every repetition made my brain stronger. The more I did it, the easier it became. I also started narrating my day in English. quietly and privately. If I was cooking dinner, I'd think, okay, I need to chop the onions, then heat the oil, then add the garlic. If I was driving, I'd think, that light is turning yellow, better slow down. If I was waiting for my coffee to brew, I'd think, come on, hurry up, I need my caffeine fix. This running commentary turned everyday life into a practice session, and it didn't require extra time or effort, just a shift in habit. Another thing that helped me was describing my feelings in English, even when they were complicated. If I felt frustrated because I was stuck in traffic, I'd think, this is annoying. I hate wasting time like this. If I felt proud of finishing a project, I'd think, I'm proud of myself. I worked hard and it paid off. Emotions are personal, and learning to name them in English made me feel more connected to the language on a deeper level. To push this even further, I started having imaginary conversations in my head, entirely in English. Sometimes I'd pretend I was explaining my day to a friend. Other times I'd imagine I was giving advice to someone younger than me. I'd even picture myself being interviewed on TV about my life. It might sound silly, but it worked. It trained my brain to form sentences quickly, without the crutch of translation. And here's the most surprising part. When you think in English, you start feeling in English too. It changes the rhythm of your thoughts. It changes the way you tell stories to yourself. It changes how you remember things. In my native language, my memories were colored a certain way. But when I started recalling events in English, they felt sharper, more vivid, like I was living them twice but in a new frame. I also noticed that my reaction time in conversations improved dramatically. Before, when someone spoke to me in English, I'd have a brief pause while I translated their words into my native language, thought of my answer, then translated it back into English. That pause made me seem hesitant, and sometimes the moment passed before I could respond. But after I made English my default thinking language, that lag disappeared. I could respond instantly, naturally, without overthinking. I want to be honest, though it wasn't always easy. Some days I felt mentally tired from holding all my thoughts in English. There were times when I just wanted to relax into my native language, especially when I was stressed. And I let myself do that occasionally. Because I knew this was a long-term journey, not a race. But I always returned to English as my main thinking mode because I knew that's how fluency would truly stick. There was also an emotional shift. At first, English felt like a guest in my mind, welcome, but not fully at home. Over time, that guest moved in, decorated the space, and became part of the family. Now I don't even think about switching between languages. English is just there, like the background hum of a refrigerator. You don't notice it, but it's always running. One of the best side effects of this change is that I started dreaming in English more often. The first time it happened, I woke up and realized my dream conversations had been entirely in English, with perfect grammar and natural expressions. That's when I knew my brain had fully accepted English as part of its default wiring. And here's something I didn't expect. Making English my default thinking language also made it easier for me to learn new English words. Before, I'd have to memorize them and consciously try to use them. Now, when I learned a new word, it would slip naturally into my thoughts without much effort. It's like my brain had a filing cabinet labeled English, and it was always open and ready. It also made me more creative in English. Since I wasn't translating, I could play with words, try different expressions, and even make little jokes in my head. Humor is one of the hardest things to learn in a second language, but when you think in that language, you start understanding the timing, the wordplay, and the cultural references better. Looking back, I realized that making English my default thinking language was one of the biggest turning points in my fluency journey. It wasn't about grammar drills or vocabulary lists. It was about rewiring my brain to live in English. And the beauty of it is that anyone can do it. You don't need a fancy course or expensive tools. You just need the willingness to shift your inner voice, sentence by sentence, thought by thought. Now, when I sit in a coffee shop and overhear people speaking English, I don't feel like an outsider listening in. I feel like I'm part of the same world, thinking and feeling in the same language, and that's a feeling I wouldn't trade for anything. Looking back on my journey, I can say with all my heart that making English my default thinking language was the turning point. It wasn't just about speaking better, it was about living differently. My mind became a place where English wasn't a guest, it was at home. Every thought, every memory, every little decision started flowing naturally in English, and that made my communication effortless. I no longer paused to translate. I no longer second-guessed every sentence. I could just speak. And with that came freedom. English stopped being a subject I studied and became a skill I owned. I could express myself exactly how I wanted, whether I was in a casual conversation with friends, presenting at work, or meeting someone new. I wasn't just fluent in English, I was fluent in life. This change didn't happen overnight, but it was worth every single moment of effort. If there's one thing I want you to remember from my story, it's this. Fluency isn't just about knowing words. It's about letting them live in your mind without fear. The more you let English take the driver's seat in your thoughts, the faster you'll become the kind of speaker you dream of being. Don't wait for the perfect day to start. Make English your everyday language in your mind, and soon it will be your everyday language in the world. Trust me. Once you cross that line, there's no going back, and you won't want to.